Thank you, Tejas. I'm actually really confused now because you're clapping and I feel I need to drink, so. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's an honor. And yes, I'm talking about building a next generation framework, and I'm going to try and do that on stage. So fingers crossed and don't expect too much. I think that's basically the name of the game. So this is me. I'm Daniel. These are some of the projects I'm involved in. I'm a core maintainer. I'm leading the Nuxt team. And I know Vue might be a word you've not heard often. It's another way of building web applications. So come in handy. And I would love to tell you all about it, but that is not actually the main point of my talk today. I'm also, if any of you are on Mastodon, who here is on Mastodon? A tiny fraction of people. If you want, go check out Mastodon. It's a decentralized social network that is pretty cool. It lets you take control. You get an account handle like an email address that's on a server, but you can interact with everybody. So and I'm part of the team building a client for it called Elk. So and then some of the other things I've listed there. Do feel free to check it all out. This is where I normally am. This is my work scene. That is one of my cats. I have 3 cats and a dog. I live in England, on the shores of a river, on the brow of a hill, underneath a forest that stretches sort of on the hillside. That is technically an ancient wood. And so if feel free, by the way, at any point, if you've got any questions about the talk or Nuxt or anything, do drop me a line on Twitter or Mastodon or a DM on Discord. And I'll probably be here with a cup of coffee. So be really glad to help. Oh, goodness, I could look at that picture forever. So just first a start, if you haven't heard of Nuxt, who here has heard of Nuxt, knows what Nuxt is? Goodness, that's more than I was expecting. Basically, I've come in here feeling like I'm walking into, I don't know, a completely unfamiliar territory, looking around, seeing people who work on key React libraries, trying to pretend I know what I'm talking about. Nuxt is a progressive framework built on Vue. It has best practices built in, so it's a little bit like the name, yes, the hat tip to Next.js is intentional, but for Vue, not React, hence the U. And it's meant to be extensible. We have huge libraries of modules that integrate different kinds of things into it. And it's meant to have a lot of goodness, a lot of magic, and bring joy when you're using it. A lot of the things, everything you see me do today can be done in Nuxt, and lots more besides. We found ourselves in a bit of trouble about 2 years, maybe even 3 years ago. A lot of things were changing in the Vue ecosystem. There was a breaking move from Vue 2 to Vue 3. Webpack was also having a major upgrade. PostCSS was having a major upgrade. And we thought, we're in a different world now. Serverless is the thing. There are new ways of approaching data, of rendering things. The old, is this server rendered, is it not server rendered, or static? That won't cut it anymore. What can we do to rethink? And we actually sat down and we rebuilt Nuxt from ground up. I'm not sure there's a single line of code that's the same between Nuxt 2 and Nuxt 3. And while doing it, we took everything that we built as much as possible and made it generic and made it universal and exposed it for other people to use. So you can use all the goodies that we use to build Nuxt, even if you're not using Nuxt. And even if you're not building a framework, hopefully. Nitro is the server engine, rendering engine that we built for Nuxt 3, and it's the thing that I want to show you today. The aim is, there are lots of aims. If you go on the website, you'll see 10 bullet points, but I think the key thing for me is that it's JavaScript that's universal. You write it once, it can run anywhere, and JavaScript that is completely and utterly minimal. It's optimized for cold starts. We'll do a live test of the app we build in a moment, and we'll see what it's like on my computer. But it's optimized for this next generation world that we're living in, and I'll show you a little bit about why. But the whole thing is powered by un.js. Go check it out, star a repo or two if you want. There are lots and lots and lots of repositories. There are something like 80 or 90 of individual little libraries that are zero dependency, work in Node in the browser, and you can deploy and use anywhere, whether or not you're using Nuxt. So, without further ado, let's dive in and build a framework on Nitro. So we are starting from scratch here. So let's install NitroPack. So NitroPack is a build tool, and it has a dev mode with hot module reloading and stuff like that. If I create a root and return some kind of data, then in my browser, I should be able to see that data straight away. And this sort of one-to-one mapping for files and other kind of data is quite nice once you get used to it. So you can actually just directly return objects, for example, rather than stringifying them. Now, the whole thing, the whole experience when using Nitro is powered by types. And you'll see that actually I'm doing crazy things here, like using an event handler function that's not defined anywhere. That's because the way we make this work is we actually have a generated tsconfig, which pulls in everything to your TypeScript environment so that TypeScript knows what Nitro is going to do for you in your project. So you now get type hinting. What's more, we're also able to do lots of cool little things. So if you're going to perform, for example, a fetch within your own project, we can tell you where you might want to fetch it from. We can also get access to the data type because it's internal, which means you get type-safe end-to-end framework whatever you're doing within your app. This particular endpoint will respond to any method because I didn't declare anything in particular. But I could make it a specific post-only endpoint. And you'll see that we now get type safety on the actual method, because the only method now that's acceptable to this endpoint is a post one. Nitro can do a lot more. I'll try not to say that because that would fail. It's the wrong endpoint. You can have middleware, so you can do things like this. We can set some kind of something on the context which can be used, consumed by the rest of the application. Everything else, by the way, is lazy loaded and only on use. So middleware will run everywhere, but the rest of your Nitro app is lazy loaded, which means you can scale quite well. You could have hundreds and hundreds of different routes that handle lots of different things, but actually, when it cold starts, it only loads the central connector between all of them. And then when you actually need to load the other route because it's being called, it will lazy load the code chunk in for it, keep it in memory, and return the response. So it's really good for serverless functions for that reason. What's more, when you see me doing things like this, I'm fetching internal data like this. I'm actually not hitting the network layer at all. It's a direct function call. And that can be quite useful. So it basically saves, again, precious milliseconds. And what else would I want to show in this particular one? OK, here's another cool thing you can do. You can actually access, again, with crypto that works both in web environments like Cloudflare or in the browser, you can access a persistent session, which is powered by, we'll just authenticate this with a password because it's a talk. We can actually just return that session. So now if I'm hitting this endpoint, you're going to see not only do I have this access to the sort of initial data, but it's also going to set a cookie which persists this session securely across interactions. So you get something that's secure, authenticated, and persistent. So you can store data there that's set on your server and access it when you next hit a request. Lots of things I could show you about Nitro. But let's dive into React, right? I think I would like to show you how Nitro could be used to build a React meta framework. Trust me, Next.js is not quivering in their boots right now. But here we go. Let's build a React meta framework. We'll create a TSX file, which is going to do exactly the same kind of thing. I probably need to install some dependencies. There we go. Gotta love PNPM, right? It's so fast. And we want to return, what is it? Render to string div hello AgentConf. And now, because this is a TSX file, Nitro doesn't ship with support for this out of the box. We're actually going to need to touch configuration for the first time. And we can do something like define Nitro config. And Nitro uses ESBuild under the hood, which is why it's so fast. Options, loaders. And we can just tell ESBuild to transpile TSX files, which happens to be the one I've used there. You can do the same with JSX. We also need to point it to this custom handler that I've created. Again, in most cases, you won't need to do this. But in this case, I've created this file called app.server.tsx, and we want it to actually handle everything that isn't matched by any other requests. So now, if I hit that endpoint, I need to restart the dev server. That's what I need to do. And I'll need to get rid of that index file because it would otherwise take it. But now, if I restart the dev server, I should be able to hit the endpoint and get an error. Have I saved it? I hadn't saved it. And actually get React server rendered data. Well, that's quite fun. Let's do the other thing we would probably need to do if we are building a framework and come up with a template for that to be put into. So we can create just a raw HTML document and stick, we'll make it main. We'll create a basic something to inject the HTML that we get into. And we'll do the same here. Now, at this point, we need to access another feature that Nitro has, which is its storage layer. So Nitro supports a universal storage layer, which is a little bit like a file system. You can mount different drivers onto different parts of the file system, somewhere else in your app, and then when you use and consume them, it will automatically route them to the right things. So bits of it could be in Redis, bits of it could be in memory, bits of it could be on your actual file system, which is what we'll use here. And actually, I'm just going to add some type support for this. We're going to do use storage, get item, root index.html. This is going to pull it from my actual file system there. And we can do this. So return that's right, isn't it? And we'll pop in the HTML there. And then if we have any issues, we'll just return the template. Hopefully this will work. Great. So we've got a whole HTML document coming, not that you can particularly see from this beautiful rendered HTML. So we've basically built Remix. No, I realize we've not built Remix. But you have a server-rendered app, which is using React to render some HTML and sending it over to the client. Let's do a little bit more than that. Let's make this a client-side app, because at the moment I could do something awful. I could do something like this. I've got this div. I could make it a button, right? I could do something. I could stick a button in there maybe, and I could do on click console log hi, and it's all working, right? But of course, it's not going to do anything because there is no JavaScript. So, which may be a plus. I don't know. So let's make it client-side rendered as well. We're going to install Vite for this, and Vite will handle the hot module reloading and the transformation that we need to render this in the browser. So basically, we'll need to create a client as well. And the client is pretty simple. What is it? It is hydrate root from the client. And basically, we're going to call hydrate root on the document ID, right? And we're going to need to split out our actual core of our app so that it's going to be accessible from both client and server. And in this case, it's this bit, right? So we can actually just create a function. I really wish Prettier could fix those kinds of things as well. And we'll need to import React. By the way, you don't actually have to do that with this. With Nitro, you can actually auto-import things and do them at a transform level. But I thought probably let's not do that in this particular talk. So we can now primarily because I don't want to get in the way of us and break. So if we import our app here, we should now hopefully still get the same data when I restart the dev server. Yep, it's all coming in, so that's fine. We're going to need to do a little bit more work to actually get this working with Vite, though. Nitro supports something called dev handlers, which lets you add particular kinds of things that only run in dev mode. So in this case, we're going to want to add a Vite route. And we can have an event handler for this. Now, we're going to use something called a lazy event handler. Now, Nitro, again, wants as much as possible to push work that has to be done to as needed. So in this case, this setup function isn't going to be run until the first request. So we're going to create a Vite dev server. And that's coming from Vite. That'll take some options. And then what we're going to want to do is we can return the event handler we need. And we have a function, because it's not built for from node middleware. It's not built for Nitro. Hopefully that will change in the future. But at the moment, it's a slightly different format. So we're going to convert it. And all of these we will need to import. Okay. So that hopefully, we're going to need to tell Vite a couple of things. So it knows that the base is there, for example. We can tell it we're a custom app. So we're going to take control of the rendering process. This isn't a normal Vite app. And we can also make it, turn it into middleware mode. So it is going to respond to this request properly. And if I then restart our dev server again, hopefully I can now perform a request to get the Vite client. Yep. Okay, so Vite is returning this gobbledygook of a source map plus more code. That shows it's working. So we can now add the bits that we need to make this work with Vite. So we can have a source, which is going to be our app client. And Vite also has its own HMR handler, which we'll pull in as well. Except, of course, we're going to need to add the prefix. Again, that's to separate it in dev mode from the actual Nitro app, so that it knows what to pull in. There we go. Let's see. Oh, what is this? Container is not a DOM element. ID. How about that? It must provide an... I was sure I wrote this, but clearly not. There we go. Okay, we've got a JavaScript running on the client now. And you can click that, and as many times as you like, you'll get high. We could even make it a little more complex. I hear people use this thing called useState. But there is one problem here, and that is we haven't actually added any kind of handling for hydration or hot module reloading because we still have the HTML from the previous load. So we'll need to do that as well if we really want to have a client-side meta framework. So we need to persist the route to start with. By the way, this could be a terrible practice. So don't actually do exactly what I'm doing here. First, check with somebody who you know is an expert with React, but I think this is going to work for us. And we can also check, there's this import meta hot thing that exists in a Vite dev context. And actually, we can make that a little bit easier for ourselves as well by just adding the Vite client types in, and so we have got them. That is going to handle reloads for us. So we get a module coming in, we can decide what to do with it. In this case, I think the way we're going to have to reload it, is we're going to want to render. It would be nice if we had some types there too. There we go. So if there's the root, we're going to render the app again, except we actually need to expose that to the module, and now we can render mod app. I think that's going to work. Let's see. Oh, I have to change something. Okay, we've got a client-side app working, server, client, and HMR. We can even do some things like maybe add some nice styles. There we go. Nice. Immediately a lot nicer. And hey, why not? There we go. That's what it's all about, right? Okay. So we've built a bit of our meta framework, but we now need to do something else. We need to build this thing so it can actually be deployed somewhere. And if I were to just try and build it with Nitro right now, it will work fine, except that it's not going to have a client component. It's going to build the Nitro server, which is great. We've got something we can deploy to a node server. We could also set some different presets, like to build for Cloudflare workers or Versal or Netlify or any specific provider. But we still need a client build, right? And because we're building a meta framework, let's build our own CLI. Now I'm going to cheat on this one because it's a little bit time-consuming to build a CLI from scratch. I'm just going to grab the Nitro one, and we're going to modify it slightly. So we're going to need MRI and C12. And we're going to delete these little roll-up injected optimizations. And these are actually all directly imported from Nitro, really. So we can do that. I'll get rid of the prepare command, which is pretty small. And so we just now have a dev and build command. So now, without doing anything, this should work. I should be able to make it executable, and then actually just run the dev server again. And hopefully that will work. Okay. But because this is our own meta framework, we probably want to have a way of loading config and not ask the user to have this massive Nitro config file when all of these things are actually really just the concern of the framework. So we can use a utility from Node.js called C12, which handles loading configuration. And you just do something like the config file is going to be agent.config.ts. And we can also have some default options as well. And then we can access them throughout the rest. So for example, let's take the Nitro config that we have here and say all of that is actually reasonable defaults we actually need for our app. We're going to paste it in as our default config. And I think there's some imports that we need to, yeah, these ones. And okay, those go up at the top. And now we have basically a config loader that's always going to return those, but still lets the user override by creating their own agent.config.ts file. So we could do that ourselves. We could do this. Declare our interface. It's going to have a Nitro config option, and we might want some Vite options as well, which is, I think, user config. And we can now export our config. Great. Okay, so we have our own config file. We have a config loader, and now we just need to start using it. So we're going to stick in there config Nitro, and whatever we now pass into our user config will be implemented by the CLI too. But the whole reason we're doing this is to build. And the reason, honestly, is that we need to do something between these two steps. So let's do this programmatically. Vite has an export called build. And we can actually call this build step after we've created Nitro, probably before it as well, but oops, build Vite. And we can pass our Vite options here. And also pass the custom ones we need. So we probably want to control the outer, so it's not where Vite normally puts it. We can put it, say, in Nitro, and we'll call it Nitro client. That can be built there. So if we did this now, we should be able to run a build step, and we can't do it because we actually need to change our index.html. So at this stage, let's make that work. Now, one of the powerful things Nitro gives you is the ability to control storage, right? I talked about that before, and this is a great example because in dev mode, we want our storage to be based on our index.html in our directory, but in production, we probably want that to be the index.html that Vite produces for us. I don't know if you're familiar with Vite, but it's going to transform that, inject the rendered assets like CSS and JS into the HTML, and we want that to be our source of truth. So what we can do here is actually create this thing called, we can create dev storage. We can give it something called, we can give it a key, so it's going to be called templates. It's going to have a file system driver, and we can actually mount that to a temporary directory where we can write this config. So we're going to mount it to Nitro templates. And we're going to also tell Nitro that when you build the app, anything that exists in the storage driver will be snapshotted and written into the build as a separate thing that can be imported when it's needed. So that means you could actually have something that's purely in memory, but at the build time, the current memory state of that storage, no matter what happens, what has happened to it in the build state, actually is the thing that gets shipped as part of the server, which can be quite a powerful thing, I think. So in this case, what we want to be able to do is read in the data that Vite has just created for us. So we've got await Nitro storage get item, and it's going to be build, I think, client, index.html. And we can actually now write it back to this new storage item. Copilot is going wild on me here. Templates, index.html, and it's going to be, actually it's going to be exactly the same. But if we're doing this whole strategy, we also need to do this in dev mode so that we actually do have something that Vite can process. So we can read in that root index.html and then just replace the thing that's there now, which is, we can put this instead. Vite will know how to build that. And then we can pop in our actual, what we want the code to be in dev mode, and put this in here. Oh, what did I say it was? This thing. Okay. Now, I honestly have no idea at this stage if this is actually going to work. Okay, why is that not lining up? Oh, I have to close the... Thank you. This is why it's so helpful to beer afterwards. I'm not sure actually if that's provided. But okay, let's build it. Okay, so we've got a build working. We've built an index.html and also some assets. And let's see, we've created this raw index chunk in our server, which seems to match. It has the asset values, that's good. As well as the other bits of our app. And hopefully, we also now have not just the server directory, but also, oh, we don't have it yet. With Nitro, you can tell it about public asset directories that you want to be part of your build. So you can pass any number of different directories. In this case, we need to point it to the directory that we've just created, which is Nitro client. We can give it a root, which is going to be, we'll make it client assets. And we can also give it a max age, and Nitro will handle caching it and setting the appropriate cache headers for those assets for us. So now if we run that build step again, we should hopefully now get our server-rendered app. For goodness sake. Nitro client, is that where it's going? Assets. Do I need that? Oh, I'm only setting this in dev mode. Probably not ideal. Let's move that into our generic configuration up here. And third time's the charm? Yeah, great. We've got some assets going on there, except that I think we want Nitro client. assets as... Seems something strange there. I'm expecting a nested assets directory. Let's try this. Okay, that's more like it, but that's still not quite right. Am I changing this in the right place? Yes. This is why you should never do live coding. Probably not going to work now. Let's see. Oh, you can ignore that. It's still searching for the Vite request. What's going on here? What is actually our response? Oh, half of the reason this isn't working is that we've not changed the import here. So we replace this with just pulling in the root data. And obviously we can't access the file system when we build it. So let's try this. This should at least output some data. That's good. And yeah, it's not adding the prefix there for me. Okay. We're moving this back into Nitro. The build step, pull it here. And have I misconfigured this somehow? Base URL. Thank you, TypeScript. It's not root, it's base URL. Let this be a lesson to you. I'm not sure what lesson. It's definitely going to be a lesson to me. So hopefully now we have a runnable server that's going to hydrate on the client side, and there we go. We have a framework. Now, just for a little bit of extra fun, this is 146 kilobytes. Let's just drop in Preact instead. Controversial. And we've got some aliases, so we can try this. Preact. And we'll say just for our client build. So we really only want to do this for Vite. This was a cool idea. I think Sunil Pai had, I'm not sure, of using all the power that you've got with React for server-side rendering and streaming, but then on the client side hydrating it with Preact. Anyway, let's see if we can do that. Okay, so we've now got a 22 kilobyte client-side app, which is, by the way, totally unfair. I'm not trying to do a legitimate comparison between the two, just show you what you might be able to do with this. And it's still working. Let's build this for Cloudflare instead. So we can build it. We've got, great, okay. We've got the Cloudflare preset. Nitro ships with loads and loads of presets for different providers, over 12 from AWS to Cloudflare, Cloudflare Pages, Versal, Netlify, StormKit, Lagon we just added the other day. Lots and lots and lots of different things, supporting many different strategies of rendering. In this case, we can preview this using the local Wrangler CLI, and hopefully that's going to work. So we've got a, what's that, 8787? Oh, probably I should have run the Cloudflare Pages preset. But anyway, you can see it still works in exactly the same way in a Cloudflare environment. Let's live deploy it. We'll call it AgentConf, which I cheekily created beforehand. Oh, I need to build it for not for Cloudflare, but for Versal. Normally, what Nitro will do is when you are deploying in CI, so in the Netlify CI or the Versal CI, it will detect what environment it's in and produce the appropriate build output. But in this particular case, I don't need to do that. I can't do that because I'm building it myself. I'm taking manual control over this. But probably this isn't going to be your experience. So we're just deploying it here. And really, it's not building. It's just copying. And so we have a little URL. Let's fingers crossed. Yes. So, a quick note about performance. I'm going to build a node server again because I want to do a really granular measurement of Nitro's performance. I told you about how it lazy loads what's needed. And by the way, this works with session support. That's crypto data that was running on Cloudflare. I don't know if I removed it or not. Oh, I did remove it. I wish I'd shown you. But that crypto works seamlessly in both the worker environment and a node environment, which is normally a real pain point if you've ever had to migrate an app from one to the other. Okay, let's just do a quick console time. Okay, save that. And then we've got this other entry point, and then we're listening at this point, so let's end it there. Okay, I would just like you to guess what the cold start might be for Nitro. Instant. Well, thank you. I've got to be more than that. Let's see. 1.4 milliseconds. So that's pretty good. And actually, we can have a timing instrumentation as well, so you can track exactly how much each extra endpoint takes to load if you're interested in that kind of thing. I wish I could show you so much more. I've implemented streaming on this, TAN-stack router, and querying, server-side data fetching. There's lots and lots that you can do. And that was just on one Sunday afternoon when my kid was in bed. So there's lots and lots of stuff, and it's because this is a good framework, not because I'm good. That's what I'm trying to communicate here. So there's lots of stuff you can do. I would love people to collaborate and build stuff on this. It's not just Nuxt using it at the moment. There's an Angular meta framework as well called Analog, which is using it, and I hope there'll be more. If you're interested and want to take things further and find out a little bit more, you can check it out on this repository. I'll just push. Oh, I need to commit probably. We'll push that. And you can also find out a little bit more about Nuxt on Nuxt.com and about Nitro on nitro.unjs.io. You can follow Nuxt if you want to. You can follow me on Twitter. I'll hopefully be putting something a little bit more full-featured out and open sourcing that. So just for fun, really. So you can see some of the things that we can do with it. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to talk here today.